Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Join us today as we talk about food for kids. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Advanced Studio Classroom. You're joining us today for our January health article. And of course, it's January 3rd, so Happy New Year. I'm a little late, but Happy New Year nonetheless. I'm your host for today. My name is Simon, and I'm joined in the studio today as we talk about this article, Food Study Revelations, by two very special guests, some of our TV teachers. Welcome, both of you. Rebecca, we've been on Advanced Radio together a few times before, but it doesn't happen all that often because you're usually on TV, a whole different medium.
That's right. So it's definitely very special to be able to be on Advanced Radio with you today. And I'm excited about talking about food because I like food.
Oh, don't we all? I have a question for you because we, of course, grew up in different places. And the question I wanted to ask you was, what kinds of food did you eat when you were growing up as a kid?
Well, a typical lunch was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That's basically just 2 pieces of bread with peanut butter on it and some jelly, something I really enjoyed. Sometimes we would eat fish sticks. I know that's not really all that healthy, right? But I did love fish sticks. But typically my mom was pretty concerned about our health. So we would eat a lot of healthy food. We wouldn't eat a lot of canned food.
So not too much packaged food.
Not too much packaged food. My grandma would. She would eat TV dinners. You know those type of foods that you put in the microwave and warm up real quickly? And I was always very jealous of my grandma.
Well, there was a time, when people felt that sort of packaged food was sort of cleaner and healthier because of food safety, like it was prepared in a sterile environment. So there's kind of like a generation thing there, definitely, especially in North America, where people feel more confident about certain types of packaged and prepared food than maybe like fresh food from the farmer or bread from the bakery, things like that. And so it's interesting, though. So you tended to have homemade meals when you were growing up.
Yes, almost every night my mom would cook something, not necessarily from scratch, but it would be a home-cooked meal of some sort. We didn't eat a lot of fast food restaurants. We didn't go to a lot of fast food restaurants. We didn't eat a lot of breaded chicken. But we did eat fish sticks, and we ate French fries.
I'm glad you mentioned the peanut butter jelly sandwich, too. That's kind of an American classic. I was not big on jelly. I was a peanut butter and honey sandwich kid. But I'm glad you mentioned that because it sort of links our conversation here to this idea of like the brown bag lunch, because students, of course, in North America usually don't eat school-prepared meals, right? Instead, they take their food. What else would you put in your lunches?
Potato chips.
Oh, the junk food kid.
Oh, yes. Well, actually, I was homeschooled. So all of my lunches were prepared at home.
You're kind of lucky because if you had been at my elementary school, you would have been mobbed by all the children with apples trying to trade for your potato chips.
Oh,
yeah.
We had to eat apples too, and carrot sticks and celery. You bet.
It would have been a good day if I had potato chips in my lunch, I tell you. Our other panelist today is Pauline, also joining us from TV. Pauline, I'm so glad you're here.
I always love being on radio. It's good to be here, Simon.
Pauline, tell us about your food as a
child.
This
is just bringing up so many good memories. I was also homeschooled in elementary school, but then I went in middle school, and I would bring lunch sometimes. I went home for lunch as well, but I remember when I would bring lunches, I was always jealous of the kids who had Lunchables, which were these just like, again, pre-packaged, open it up, and they had all these little, I don't know, like...
They're so wrong, too, when you think back. Basically, listeners, she's talking about this plastic package that has one little cup for, like, meat, one little cup for cheese, one little cup for crackers, and kids kind of make their own mini sandwiches. You can buy them in a supermarket, but they're just so processed. There's nothing natural about them,
They're
right?
not that healthy, and they were expensive. So my family, I grew up in a family of 6, so 4 kids and 1 income. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, so my family was very budgeted, and they weren't going to spend all this extra money on this highly processed food. So instead, I came with my peanut butter and jelly sandwich and my carrot sticks and apple and maybe some nuts, but it just felt like, I don't know, it just felt like I was like the dowdy kid who just had all of these little, sandwich bags, and they were all like piling up in front of me when they just had this very slick box of Lunchables. It seemed so much cooler.
I understand how you feel, but you used one word there that was kind of interesting. You described yourself as the dowdy kid. Mm-hmm. What is a dowdy kid?
Dowdy. You think of somebody who doesn't have very fashionable clothes, who maybe looks like there's all these stereotypes, like you are homeschooled, that you just aren't as cool, aren't as fashionable.
You're eating an apple instead of a bag of potato chips with your lunch. You're the sad kid in the corner. Oh,
but of course,
sad.
now as an adult, I just think, man, my parents were constantly making those decisions that were so much healthier. So I was jealous of my friends who got to drink pop all the time and have macaroni and cheese, which I thought was amazing, and I was having to go home to a home-prepared meal and drinking water, and that seemed like so... Again, not as cool, not as fun, not as great, but it was so much healthier. And now I'm grateful for that as an adult.
You know, it's interesting because both of you mentioned that the food you were fed as children tended to be healthier, less packaged, less processed. And I mentioned after Rebecca was talking that there's a generational thing. But the reason I mention this is because our article today is called Food Study Revelations. And a revelation, of course, means like new information or a revealing of a new thing. But this idea that we're going to bring up, that research shows that some of these packaged foods aren't very healthy, that is really not a revelation, right? I mean, our mothers knew that a long time ago, that homemade food was kind of healthier and more controllable. There are other reasons for that too, though. You mentioned cost. So Lunchables were, of course, expensive, right? So particularly larger families, or if you had one working parent because your mother was maybe a housewife or something like that, there were cost concerns too. But in a lot of ways, this revelation, or these revelations we're going to talk about today, they are maybe new information in the details, but at the same time, it's not really new information that there's a difference between healthier and less healthy eating and packaged foods versus sort of natural homemade foods.
Well, I think for my mom, it was actually something that she did have to learn, because for her growing up, they did eat a lot of prepackaged food, like hot dogs and Spam and a lot of canned stuff, because for them, it was more cost effective.
Wait a minute. I thought those things were natural. I ate a lot of hot dogs growing up too. They're not homemade. No, I'm just kidding, listeners. Just kidding.
That was a good one, Simon.
But my generation also spent a lot of time with hot dogs, I would say, So maybe a mixing with my generation, but things tended to be homemade.
Right. And I also come from a different background with food because I grew up vegetarian. My parents didn't grow up vegetarian, but they chose to be when they started a family. So that was also a difference between me and the rest of the world.
What did you eat instead of hot dogs?
Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
There you go. The dowdy kid. There you go. Oh, that's rough.
I don't know.
Okay. Well, let's get into our article here today. This health article is sort of subdivided into different sections. The section we're going to get into today is called Research Shows Some Food Additives May Harm Children's Health. And when we talk about food additives, Rebecca, what really are we talking about?
We're basically talking about things that we add to the food that's not healthy. So chemicals and stuff like that. That might make it taste better, though.
It might make it taste better. They do other things, too,
Also
though, right?
preservatives, so it makes it able to sit on the shelf for longer. Things that don't need to be refrigerated, they have these preservatives. Those are another form of additive.
If those Lunchables weren't so popular, they could have stayed on the shelf for 5 years.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah,
Right.
but the kids were just eating them as fast as they could make them. Okay, well, let's get into the first reading. Listeners, you can join us on page 12 of your Advanced Studio Classroom magazine. Of course, we're on January 3rd, and we're going to start reading with the top section of the left-hand column. So let's go ahead and listen to that now.
Food Study Revelations, an informative new look at food additives and food triggers that prompt some children to overeat. Research shows some food additives may harm children's health. Families should reduce exposure to synthetic chemicals found in food colorings, preservatives, and packaging materials, as a growing body of research shows they may harm children's health, according to a policy statement and technical report from the American Academy of Pediatrics released online. The statement also suggests improvements to the food additives regulatory system, including updating the scientific foundation of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's Safety Assessment Program and retesting all previously approved chemicals.
Okay, so as we get into this reading, we are told that families should reduce their exposure. I guess that basically means eat less, use less of these things called synthetic chemicals. Now, Rebecca, you mentioned chemicals, but I'm wondering, Pauline, if you can tell us what's the difference between a synthetic chemical and, say, a natural chemical?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't fully understand this myself, but we know that there are chemicals that naturally occur in the world. But the ones that are put in foods don't just happen to be in an apple, or, it's something that's created in a lab somehow, and then injected into the food in some way. So it's not naturally occurring. It's something that is intentionally put in there and fabricated. It's created and put in there for some reason. Again, we talked about maybe for the taste or for the color or for the preservative function.
Now, people here in East Asia will be familiar with this idea because over the last few years, we've had a number of food scandals that tend to be associated with these synthetic chemicals. And they give us a list here in the reading of where you would find these kinds of chemicals. Rebecca, would you mind just reading off that list for us?
Well, in our lesson, we read food colorings, preservatives, and packaging materials, as a growing body of research shows that may harm children's health.
Okay, so we're basically talking about the fake things that add to the food, right? So we're talking about colors that make them brighter. You might see those in particular in things like, well, actually really everywhere, hey? Just about every kind of packaged food you'd get, but also preservatives that keep things from going bad, and packaging materials, so things that keep them, again, from going bad or being exposed to dirty kind of stuff. They tell us there's a growing body of research. So we know what research is, but what do we mean when we say there's a growing body, Pauline?
So I think of this in the same way that we talk about a body of water. It's not just a drop of water. It's just this large mass of it. And so here we have a large mass of research that we can pull from and see that that research shows, it's continuing to show that all of these different places that we see synthetic chemicals, they're doing bad things to children's health. It's harming children's health.
So all of these different research studies that are part of this body are pointed out in a report that's been produced by an organization. This organization didn't necessarily do all of the research themselves, but they're pointing this out in their report. And that organization is called the American Academy of Pediatrics. Now, pediatrics, that's an interesting word. It reminds me of the word pediatrician. What exactly is a pediatrician, Rebecca?
Well, a pediatrician is a type of doctor that works with children.
Now, this word is always confusing to me because there's another doctor name that is associated with feet, podiatry, right?
Oh.
And they're so close. You really just have to remember the difference. So a pediatrician is a kid doctor. A podiatrist is like a foot specialist, right?
Right.
Don't mix them up when you're making your doctor's appointment, or your poor sick child will end up with a different pair of shoes instead of medicine for their cough. Okay, that brings us to the second paragraph here, where we learn that really the focus of the report isn't just to blame these different chemicals. In fact, they're making a suggestion. And who are they making that suggestion to, Pauline?
They are suggesting that the food additive regulatory system makes some improvement, and that regulatory system includes a few different organizations, specifically the U.S. Food and Drug Administration more than anything.
Yeah, and they're actually that organization, the Food and Drug Administration, you often hear people refer to them as the FDA, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel like that acronym is actually kind of the common name. People say the US FDA or just the FDA. So they're basically suggesting that this government organization change the way it marks or labels or assesses different kinds of food so that people are aware of the dangers that are kind of involved with the things in those foods. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think it's a pretty strong statement when they say update the scientific foundation of your organization, in particular because of the type of organization this is, all of it should be based on science, right? It's all about understanding the nutritional needs of children to adults and what's harmful, what's good for you. And they're making a pretty strong statement saying you need to relook at the foundation that you're building all of your models on, all of your advice and counsel. You need to look at that and make sure that it's got the most up-to-date information that's really solid and can guide people well.
Okay. And that really brings us to our second reading. You'll see that in the next section, we basically have a Q&A, which is an interview or a question and answer session with the lead author. And the lead author is just the main person who wrote this report. And so they're basically going to answer some questions for us. So join us on page 12 in your magazine, the bottom part of the left-hand column, and we're going to go through the first question and answer from this interview right now.
Q&A with the lead author. We asked Leonardo Tresande, Council on Environmental Health member and lead author of the policy statement, to tell us more about these concerns. Question: what are the growing number of studies showing us? Answer: over the past 2 decades, an accumulating body of science suggests some food additives can interfere with a child's hormones, growth, and development. Potentially harmful effects of food additives are of special concern for children because they are more sensitive to chemical exposures because they eat and drink more relative to body weight than adults do and are still growing and developing. An early injury to their organ systems can have lifelong and permanent consequences.
And so our first question here really just asks for a summary of what this different research is telling us. And so what is it telling us, Pauline?
Well, like we've been saying all along, it's just saying that food additives are harmful specifically for children, and then it gives you a little bit more detail about the ways that it can be harmful for children and why. So it says it can interfere with children's hormones, growth, and development. So that's a lot of different things that it can harm. And then he goes on to give us some reasons why it can have such a harmful effect on children, even more than adults who are consuming maybe the same chemicals, the same additives, but aren't harmed as much as children are.
Okay, so potentially this is a big issue because children's hormones are like the chemicals that control things that are happening within your body. And particularly for children, hormones are playing a very important part as they grow and develop, right? And so really this is an issue of maybe food possibly negatively affecting your growth and development through these hormones. So that's potentially a big issue, and that's what they say as we head into the next paragraph. Potentially harmful effects of food additives are a real concern for children, like you said, Pauline. But why? Why for children?
I thought this was really interesting. A couple of the reasons they gave, I guess, were just like a no-duh for me.
Yeah,
like
hormones, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously children are kind of in a very sensitive stage for their hormones because they're growing. But the other reason they gave was very unexpected for me.
Yes, me too. Yeah, this idea, and it makes sense when they say it, but you never thought about it, that they're consuming compared to their body weight, way more food than we are. So that just means it's going to affect them a lot more.
You know, the crazy thing about that is you always hear parents complain about how much their children eat, right? Like we have all these phrases in English, like my kids are eating me out of house and home is the big phrase you say, right? Like, or we'll say things like, that kid must have a hollow leg. The suggestion being that, like, their stomach goes all the way down into their leg because they put so much.
Yeah, we'll say,
right?
I don't know where he puts it. Like, I don't know where
does
it
he
goes.
Put it all? There's all these different phrases that suggest kids just eat way more than you think they would.
Right.
And so that's really interesting because apparently that's true. Yeah, that's what it's telling us here. And so I guess the idea being that not only are they developing, but also they're being exposed to much more of the chemical in a more sensitive time. So those two factors kind of working together. Rebecca, tell us, what kind of effect could this have on organ systems?
Well, according to our article here, it could end up having a lifelong and permanent consequences on the organ systems.
And what exactly are organs, Rebecca?
Oh, that's a really good question.
It's a musical instrument, yeah?
Yes. We do have the organ that is a musical instrument. It's kind of like the piano, but very different. But no, the organs that we're talking about in the body would include like the heart. You have the different intestines, basically the parts of the body that help the body function.
Your insides.
The insides,
The insides that do things.
Right.
That's your organs. That's it. Great stuff. So that brings us to our second question, and we'll just finish up with that reading now.
Question: what additives does this statement highlight? Answer: the additives of most concern, based on rising research evidence cited in the report, include bisphenols, such as BPA, used to harden plastic containers and line metal cans, can act like estrogen in the body and potentially change the timing of puberty, decrease fertility, increase body fat, and affect the nervous and immune systems. BPA is now banned in baby bottles and sippy cups. Phthalates, which make plastic and vinyl tubes used in industrial food production flexible, may affect male genital development, increase childhood obesity, and contribute to cardiovascular disease. In 2017, the Consumer Product Safety Commission banned the use of some phthalates in childcare products, such as teething rings.
All right, listeners, you're going to have to bear with us and be patient with us here because this part of today's article gets into some words that I'm not sure any of us are going to pronounce correctly. So if in doubt, go back and listen to the reading again. If you want probably the best pronunciation. We'll do our best, though, so please just be patient.
But also be encouraged that even native speakers, when we come across these big scientific words, you're not the only ones who just have to make a guess. I mean, English,
right.
Unfortunately, our phonetic system is not the best out there. And so we do our best with it, but it's difficult.
Not all words are created equally difficult, and not all speakers are equally good at pronunciation, right? So it happens for everybody. So we're going to get into chemical names here, basically, because the question is, what additives does the statement highlight? So basically, what are these dangerous chemicals? Okay, Pauline, tell us.
Okay, so now we get into the nitty-gritty. Well, sometimes you hear people say, which means we're getting into the details. We've gotten the broad strokes of what this research was about and what their general conclusions were, but now we're getting much more specific. So we learned about this one, which I'm going to call bisphenol. Does that sound right?
I would have said bisphenol. I wish we'd listened to the reading more closely right now, but yeah. Okay, so
Well, I'm just going to call it BPA,
right?
which apparently is one of the types. And it's used to harden plastic containers and line metal cans. So when I read this, the whole time we were talking about this, I was feeling pretty good because I don't feel like
I'm not eating cans, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't eat a lot of processed food, but then you hear like, wait a minute, like, okay, so canned food, maybe is not the best. And when they talk about these plastic containers, I don't necessarily eat processed food, but I do put my food in plastics when I don't finish them. Your leftovers, or when I make a big thing of rice, I put it in a plastic container. So I will say this is my first moment of suddenly feeling a little bit of this is kind of concerning. I should look at this.
Well, I know that over the years, I've noticed that you can actually buy plastic bottles and plastic containers that say BPA free, which means that there is no BPA in it. And I remember this happened several years ago. I was talking with my mom, and she made a really big deal about not using plastic or only finding plastic that says BPA free. And so that's something to keep in mind, too, when you do want to buy plastic containers or plastic water bottles.
And the reason for that is that this chemical, BPA, can act like a fake estrogen. And estrogen, of course, is a hormone that's associated most strongly with women and the development of women. And so it tells us that, too much exposure to this chemical can potentially cause some changes in the timing of puberty, so when people develop into adults, and it can decrease fertility, so the ability to have children. It can also make people gain in body fat and affect their nervous and immune system. So all kinds of effects.
Yeah, that's a scary list, man. That's a lot of things.
And it says here that in particular, this chemical is banned in baby bottles and sippy cups. So they're already aware that it's dangerous enough. You should keep it away from small children.
And I was relieved to read that, to think, oh, good. So that's one less thing, hopefully, that parents have to be really worried about, thankfully.
Okay, so that brings us to our second chemical here, phthalates. Phthalates. So the pH makes an F sound, right? And then phthalates. Okay, now where do you find these things, Rebecca?
Well, we read phthalates, which make plastic and vinyl tubes used in industrial food production. Flexible may affect, well, that answers your question right there.
and then we get into things we're not necessarily all comfortable about talking about on the radio. So basically, this affects male development. And they say here it affects male genital development. And it increases childhood obesity again, just like the last chemical we talked about, where it can make people have more body fat. It also contributes to heart disease, cardiovascular disease here. Well, that brings us to the end of today's article. But if you are interested in learning about more of these dangerous additives, be sure to join us on tomorrow's program, because we're going to be talking about our health article again then.
And we'll get some tips for how to avoid this, which that'll be good.
There you go. Until then, this is Simon,
Rebecca,
and Pauline
saying goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.